Welcome to Oxford History Today, the second generation. I'm Terry Stiles, and with me is former Oxford Township Fire Chief Jack Leroy, also lifetime resident of Oxford. So Jack is going to take it away, and we are standing at the corner of Oakwood and M24, and I'm sure if you're from this area you know this corner well. And the reason we're here is Jack has a huge history of M24, something I never even thought about, and it's our main vein in Oxford. So Jack, it wasn't always right here, was it?
No, the vintage you see now was constructed in 1958-59 from a two-lane configuration, and we're standing just about where M24 originally passed through and connected to what is now Ludwig Road and went up over the hill.
So Ludwig is just off of, it's the first turn off of Oakwood.
Correct.
West,
yes.
correct?
Right here by the carpool lot.
And so it went all the way down, what is
Ludwig
now?
Road went all the way up, well, Lapeer Road did at that time, went to merge in with what is now Lapeer Road at the north end, south of Brower Road.
Okay.
And prior to that, it was two-lane all the way to Pontiac originally, from the time of first construction in the early 1930s to a concrete version.
Well, so what was the reason for them to redirect it? Well, I know it's straighter, but it's only a matter of a mile and a half or so, right?
Traffic volumes more than anything. M24 has always been a heavy commuter highway, and with Pontiac having the auto industry that it did, especially in the 1950s and 60s, the traffic became just too much for two-lane roads. The accidents were a regular occurrence, and it was decided they needed to widen it and create a semi-divided highway, at least in the open areas, through the towns.
And well, speaking of through the towns, and I know we're not here to talk totally about Lake Orion, but M24, was that the first bypass of Lake Orion? Did well, people used to travel right through downtown Lake Orion?
Yes, they did. Until the early 1930s, M24 paralleled the Detroit United Railway, the electric railway, which existed, and it actually went into downtown Lake Orion by way of Broadway Street to Elizabeth Street and back to what area is now M24, and that was pushed straight through in about 1932 and 33, along with a greater reconstruction of the highway all the way through to Lapeer.
So we had a train tracks running all the way through Oxford. How was that affected by the implementation of M24, or was it? Well,
the State Highway Department, which was started here in Michigan in 1912, in 1916 they had to bring their roads into compliance with the federal mandates that were coming down, and with the creation of U.S. highways, the state had to come up with a numbering system, and they had to build their highways to certain standards. So starting in about 1916, they gave the villages notice that they were going to be regulating the highways that were coming through their area. And some of those highways were shared with railroads, such as the Detroit United Railway, which was an electric road through the center of town. And they ended up giving them 5 years. So by the end of 1922, they had to have the highways off of, the railroad rather, off of the state road beds.
Wow.
And they reconstructed those behind the stores in downtown Oxford, and they paralleled them in Orion.
But then they were no longer the DUR, right? Or did they reconstruct the DUR?
Well, the DUR, was reconstructed straight through Oxford. It crossed M24 at the north end of town, just at the village limits, and then continued on to Ortonville and Flint. So prior to that, history-wise, highways did not evolve until the automobile started coming on substantially after the turn of the century. Rail traffic still transported the majority of people. So as they started to widen the roads, grade them, pave them, they needed areas to do it, and they couldn't have interference. So that's what forced the railroads to the sides. And in many cases, it wasn't just Oxford. They actually removed railroads from the roadways.
Wow, isn't that something? And so, and M24 then continues on for how far?
Well, altogether, M24 is 74.5 miles long from its junction with Interstate 75 in Auburn Hills. It ends at M25 in Unionville area, north of Carroll.
Oh my. And
that was the last segment that was constructed in the late 1960s. Prior to that, it ended in Carroll.
And we earlier had a conversation, Oakwood was a very big main thoroughfare.
Yes, it was.
At one time as well. What happened with that?
Well, Oakwood, the community of Oakwood, which straddles the Oxford and Brandon Township lines, was struck by a tornado in spring of 1896. And most of the town was destroyed at that time. I believe there was 34 people died across northern Oakland County from the storm. And Oakwood,
and it basically wiped out.
Yeah, Oakwood was, for the most part, completely wiped out. It never did come back like it was. Neither did Thomas, which was also struck. And
you said that there's some stuff at the museum that actually are artifacts from that tornado.
We have a postage cancellation stamp at the post office that came from the Oakwood post office and was missing for nearly 100 years until a farmer found it in his field here in northern Oxford Township, uncovered it when he was tilling the field.
Isn't that fantastic?
And it has the date of May 25th, 1896 on it.
Wow, recording our history.
Yes, it is.
So a little bit of history about Thomas. That actually was quite a going concern at one time. Why was that?
Well, Thomas had the railroad, the same as Oxford did, and actually was known as Thomas Station for a while. And it was building up substantially by the time the tornado struck it. It never did recover quite to the extent that it was before the tornado hit.
And so what kind of brought people to this area initially, and then we'll wrap it up after?
Well, initially, the first settlement was in this area where we are right here at Oakwood and 24 area. It was Metamora and the area just north of M24 were the first settlers. Eldridge Deming came here in 1832, and Avery Brown just north of there off of Metamora Road. You have to understand that M24, or Lapeer Road as we know it, that was nothing but paths that the Indians had tracked in. The Nipissing tribe of the Chippewas had been in this area for years prior to that time, and they actually made friends with the settlers. They were not, anti-settlement. So they promoted the growth. They didn't hinder it at all, let's say, and they did help out in the construction of their cabins and dwellings that they built. Basically, at that time, the highway, the main highway was from present juncture of M24 and Metamora Road. Metamora Road carried the bulk of the traffic. And as the area evolved, that became known as a territorial road, which really ran all the way from Rochester to Lapeer.
We're going to talk more about those Native Americans in this area and the influence they had. When we come back, don't go away. We're going to talk more about North Oxford.
Don't miss what's going on in your local government meetings. Watch Elgin Nichols and Dave Kinney on Minutes by Minute. Airs Monday through Friday, 7 a.m., 11:30 a.m., and 11:30 p.m., where they add a touch of humor to local politics.
Welcome back to Oxford History today, the second generation, and you can see where we are. We're still at Oakwood and M24. We just had a great conversation about why M24 changed. It used to be Ludwig Road, now it's M24 straight on through, and we touched a little bit on the Native American population around here, which is fascinating to me. They were helpful in this area. I know that they were helpful in Addison as well. They actually were helping the people in Addison learn how to make baskets, etc. How did that change, do you know?
Well, I think more than anything, from all I've read, is that as the population increased, the trend was to move further south. This area in which they originally developed near Metamora and Oakwood Road was actually an area that was quite swampy around the fringes of it. And in fact, it had the name for years, the Cedar Swamp. And as the population increased, they tended to move south more to an area which had been created, and they actually ended up getting the post office shifted from the northern area, which Eldridge Deming had started, and it actually had an area called Demingsburg. Well, they moved it to what Washington wanted to designate as Oxford Corners, which is now basically Burdick and Washington Streets in Oxford, moved further south.
Okay.
So as they moved further south, they got into less densely forested areas and swampy areas, into more what they called the Great Barren Plains. It was more like open fields, and they started the village a little further south, and in years to come they developed it further south. So as a result, they moved away from where most of the Indians spent their time, which was at the far end, northern end of the township, and on across all the way to the St. Clair River area.
Because of the forests and the water.
Correct.
Right. Okay. So they lived off of that.
Right.
And the move of the population, the white population, was
South.
because of farming.
Well, they could farm further south, and they did, developed a lot of farming. Oxford actually became known for its farming before the days of its gravel era.
Right.
It actually became known as a nickname in the 1920s, Begatown, because of the number of rutabagas and vegetables that were produced in Oxford. This was in the days way before the gravel pits became dominant in the area.
Which is basically the northern half of Oxford Township, right? Northern and in the middle of it. It doesn't extend, well, it extends to Addison Township?
To the Addison Township line for the most part. There was gravel mining, all the way there at one time.
So how did that develop?
Well, gravel mining started around 1910 or so in this area, and evolved. Probably its peak would have been around 1960s, early 60s.
And we all remember that, right?
Yes.
I do.
And they still mine gravel here in Oxford, not to the extent that it was done years ago, but it doesn't take the manpower that it did back then because of the large equipment that is now available.
Right, the advancement in machinery.
Correct.
And were there a number, more than 3 or less than 10 of different gravel companies?
I think around a half a dozen gravel companies evolved through here. Some changed names over the years, but the predominantly large one was American Aggregates Corporation, and they leased their land from the CN Ray Industries, or Ray Industries Company, which was actually the predecessor or founders of C. Ray Boats later on.
Okay.
And their owner was CN Ray.
Okay, so that's basically where the money came from to start those boats in the first place.
More than likely.
What a little, give us a little history of C. Ray. How long were they here?
C. Ray was here, well, I want to say, I believe it was 1961. They moved into Oxford, and they were here up until about 92 or 3 when they moved south. So
the industry within this area that kept people in this area really hasn't flipped and flopped that much. It started out as a farming community.
Yes, industry evolved over the years here, primarily from farming, then into gravel mining, and now to the shop operations we have in machine shops that we have. In fact, you can see some in this general area here at Oakwood and 24.
Yeah, which also seems to be a north.
Yes, well, M24 corridor being an easy shipping corridor between Interstate 75 and Interstate 69. That's why it sees such a high volume of traffic, and always has, because it's a connector between the two.
Well, I know you're a studier of history, but can you project the future? What do you see for M24 and how that might affect our community?
Well, unfortunately, it's going to become busier and busier as the population shifts further north. We're seeing it in the development of the various subdivisions throughout Oxford Township and Addison Township. So I think it's just going to put more and more traffic, and how they'll choose to route that traffic will be the interesting challenge.
Do you see them making any route changes, or maybe just try to continue to modify?
It's going to be hard to shift either east or west from downtown Oxford because of the present development without purchasing large tracts of land and demolishing present structures.
Pretty expensive.
Be very expensive. I'm sure they'll have to address those kind of issues. We can only look into the crystal ball. Maybe they'll come up with something
not in our lifetime.
back to the rapid rail transportation or elevated rail transportation.
Right, that would be great. So we also had some pretty famous people here, from what I understand, in Oxford, but we also had our own little airport, didn't we?
Just actually adjacent to this parcel of property was a little airfield known as Van Wagner Field. It was for small airplanes, and later a glider strip through the early 1970s. They had glider operations there, and that was adjacent to American Aggregates mining area.
I remember that. I remember gliders going through. We had sporting activities out here. We had the boat races out here. We'll talk about that on another show when we get closer to town. But it is a community that's something for everyone. And we're going to stay with us. We will be right back.
Canine Stray Rescue is Oxford's own local dog rescue. Each year they take in hundreds of dogs and bring them into suitable homes. A certified nonprofit organization, Canine Dog Rescue strives to give pound dogs a new leash on life. To donate, adopt, or even volunteer, call them at 248-628-0435 or go to their website, dogsaver.org, and click on the Canine Stray Rescue League link.
Welcome back to Oxford Today, the second generation. Again, I'm Terry Stiles, and with me is former Fire Chief of Oxford Township, Jack Leroy, and historian extraordinaire. So we're going to touch on, we are standing on Metamora Road, and it's dirt, but it at one time was not Metamora Road, right? Where are we at right now?
We're at what would be the northern junction of M24 and Metamora Road, and it was originally trails that evolved into a road that ran continuous from Rochester to Lapeer called the Territorial Road.
Wow. Yeah.
And as you know, the highway, the people came, the highways got widened. This dirt segment across the road here on M24 and behind us, that was M24 originally. And it ran to Lapeer through downtown Metamora and all the way to Hunters Creek Road, Clark Road, and into Lapeer.
Oh my goodness, wow.
And it did so until the early 1930s, when the first portion of the original highway that we see behind us was put in.
So it went through, what was Demings?
Demingsburg was the area that was originally the settlers in about 1830s, early 1830s. Aldridge Deming and his family came here. Prior to that, there was a trapper just north of there in Section 4. His name was Avery Brown. He was but he didn't live here all the time. So Demings are credited with being some of the first settlers around 1832. And it evolved to the point where he had a post office in his house, which was given the name Demingsburg, and it stayed that way till it was shifted south into the present village.
Into the village.
And
the trappers, were there many trappers here settling in this area?
Well,
or they came seasonally, right?
Trappers came seasonally, and because of the abundance of streams and forests in the area, and they seemed to get along with the Indians quite well. They didn't have any known battles that like they did further out west.
Documented,
Right. Yeah, they got along. The settlers did. The Indians and the settlers, peacefully coexisted. And in fact, there's several documented cases of the Indians helping the settlers build their cabins and homes as time passed. So the tribe was a large tribe, but it covered a big area all the way from this general area all the way to Lake St. Clair, St. Clair River area. So it was quite expansive.
So were they trappers as well?
Oh, the Indians, they trapped and they hunted, but they also respected the wildlife for the fact that that was their means of subsistence and their life.
Right.
Yes.
And what kind of wildlife was here?
Well,
What were they trapping?
They were trapping. There was plenty of deer, and they could trap
Beaver.
muskrat, beaver from the streams, fish. It was quite abundant.
Yeah, it still is.
It still
but
is.
Yeah, right. But yeah, that's amazing. It's hard to believe standing here on the new 24, and with all the industry around us, it's hard to believe that it was animals, critters.
You've
that
only got to
kept
get
people
about a half a
alive.
mile off of the highway to the east, and you'll see some pretty wild areas
That's
all the way up to
true.
the northern boundaries of the township.
Still wildlife.
There's
Not
still a lot
only
of
deer,
wildlife.
but we've got coyotes out there,
Yes, we
and
do.
fox, and now we've got our turkeys back, which is really nice. Well, we're going to move on. Speaking of water and stream, we're going to head on down to Stony Lake Park, and talk a little bit about that. So don't go away. So welcome back to Oxford History today, the second generation. I am at one of my favorite places in Oxford Township. We are both here. We're at Stony Lake Park, and it didn't always look like this, did it?
No, this area of the township park was originally known as Vets Beach, Vets Park, until the late 1890s. The township actually acquired it at that time, and it didn't get a lot of development. In the 50s, there was one pavilion and the beach house down by the lake, and then the township was able to get funding and improve it over the years since then.
Well, so how did them widening M24 affect the park area and the whole facade of the place?
Well, this entirely changed in about 1959 when M24 behind us was widened. It had been 2 lanes with a gasoline station and grocery store right here at the entrance of the park.
Oh, right at the entrance,
and
okay.
This area here, it was along where the present northbound lanes are, was basically north and southbound, and they added the southbound lanes. There was a large hill that started down right from this point and went down just above the lake level, not far above lake level, and then back up before you got to Ray Road. And it was the scene of some very, very horrendous automobile accidents throughout the years. One of them was in 1954. There was 5 people killed in an accident, 5-car accident. 2 cars had collided, and then 3 more struck those cars in the gully. And there was several other multiple fatalities in that area. It became known as Slaughter Hill.
It was a passing incidents.
Passing incidents, people trying to make time, to get in or out of town as fast as they could. And as the highway was redone, they filled that in. The grocery store and gasoline station, they were removed, and several houses in this area and cottages and the beach known as Stevens Beach were taken out when the road was widened.
24
yeah, they were right at where the highway is now, and you can still see the remnants of the old dock if you go down here and look into the water where it was. But this was the center of a public beach, and then that was separate from the township park, which was behind it. So now it's all township park here.
Oh, isn't that nice? And we were able to maintain and keep it from the 1890s, isn't that? Bravo, Oxford. How did it change downtown, the looks of downtown?
Downtown, beginning in the early 1950s, the State Highway Department had plans to widen M24, and they began doing so by coming through the villages, both Oxford and Lake Orion. And in doing so, they cut down trees all along the right-of-ways and widened the roads. M24 originally was a dirt highway on both sides, and in the 1930s they started paving out segments of it, and by the 1950s the volume of traffic on the 2-lane road was so great that it was causing problems, and through downtown Oxford area was 3 lanes on either side of the business district, and they chose to widen it to 4. In doing so, they had to take over 100 trees down.
Oh my goodness.
And in 52, the village actually got an injunction against the state of Michigan and their contractor, Eisenhower Construction, to stop taking out trees and widening the highways until it was heard in court. Unfortunately, they didn't prevail, and the state went ahead and widened the highway to 4 lanes, and Oxford lost the shaded look through the area approaching town.
So it actually looked similar to maybe Clarkston.
Clarkston, very much similar to what Clarkston would have looked like. With it being at 4 lanes either side, then in the late 50s, when they chose to come out of Pontiac with divided highways, you know, they acquired additional rights of way, moved several houses, tore several other businesses and houses down between Pontiac and Oxford, and north all the way to Brower Road, where it presently goes back to 2 lanes.
You spoke earlier, it affected the Red Barn subdivision.
Yeah, actually the Red Barn subdivision was just beginning in its infancy to be developed, and M24 was a 2-lane road there on the roadbed of what is left of Moon Road, and through the parking lot area of the shopping center there, just north of Thielen. That was actually where there was a big red barn called the Red Barn. That's where Red Barn Sub got its name. And then it was Albin's Country Cousin, and later the Backseat Saloon Way Station. And there was a farmhouse across the street and a grocery store, which were torn down as the highway was divided. And the railroad tracks for the Detroit United Railway originally had passed over that Moon Road, Lapeer Road area, by what is Parkhurst Homes, and they ended up uncovering them several years later when they resurfaced, and they took out sections of track that had been buried there for years.
Oh, for heaven's sakes! Didn't know that the tracks. So there were tracks on both sides of 24.
Actually, the tracks, the electric railways came further to the west at that point, but as it progressed north into the village, it paralleled the New York Central, Penn Central. At that time, it was probably the Michigan Central, into downtown Oxford, actually running down Washington Street. And the state took over the highways in 1926, and they said that the states, the towns, and any other encumbrances on the state right-of-way would have to be removed. So the railway was forced to acquire secondary properties, which they chose in the alleys behind the businesses on the east side of Washington Street. And they moved the railway further to the east, and it actually made a straighter right-of-way because it didn't curve to come in and then turn at East Street and go down to their depot, which sat at the corner of East and Lauk Street.
It went east and west at one point as well.
It went north and south to Oxford, passed under Center Street, and came up at Church Street, around back of what is now the fire station where the high school had been. And then crossed just north of where the tan salon is, and went east-west all the way to Ortonville, and then on to Flint.
Well, I so appreciate you giving me this history of Oxford. I love this town. I wasn't raised here, but I've lived my entire adult life here, and I've often wondered why do they build the roads the way they do around here? So I appreciate you doing that.
You're welcome.
And I appreciate your time today. And you made it through Oxford History today, our 2nd generation. We are going to have Mr. Leroy come back, and I appreciate you being here. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome, Terry.